All right, with Hashem's help, we will learn Yevamos Daf Samach Aleph. Just some good news that for the next, I think, 6 or 7 daf, it's either going to be relatively very easy, and even better, we're going to get into some nice Agada Tegamaris. But let's begin. I think Daf Samach Aleph has very little Agadata, but we're going to go into it. And it's a relatively very easy Geshmaka Daf. Says the Mishnah, Daf Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. Ireis Esho Almana. What happens if a Kohen Gadol, as a Kohen, gets engaged to a widow? A Kohen could marry a widow. He just cannot marry a divorcee. And then V'nismana Liyos Kohen Gadol, and now he became appointed to be a Kohen Gadol. So the Mishnah Paskins, we had this quoted before, Yichnois, he can marry her. Why? Because as we learned before, Ki Yikach, when the Torah is speaking about a Kohen Gadol not being allowed to Yikach a Almana, Yikach goes to Kedushin. Here, he's already with her. And now this says the Mishnah, Umaisa bi Yehoshua ben Gamla, Shekidesh es Marta bas Baitus, that he got engaged to Marta bas Baisus, and then Uminohu Hamelech Liyos Kohen Gadol, and after he was engaged with her, Kedushin, the king appointed Rabbi Yehoshua ben Gamla to the position of Kohen Gadol, and nevertheless Vikansa. Now this Marta bas Baisus was an Almana. So this is a Maisa. The Mishnah normally brings a story to authenticate, to say this is the halach. Continues the Mishnah. What about a Shemeres Yavam? Should nafel lifnei koyin hedyet? Now a Shemeres Yavam by default is an almana. So Reuven Koyin married Rachel. Reuven dies. Shimon is a Shemeres Yavam. And V'nismana Liyos Kohen Gadol. And before he did the Yibum, the brother became appointed to the Kohen Gadol. Says the Mishnah here, even if the brother, the Yavam, already gave her Maimar, which is at least lahalacha, lebeisilu, a engagement, they're even closer, still hareze lo yichnois. The Gemara is going to ask why not. But and what happens? We have this information. And if lo yichnois, what does he need to do to her? And chalitza and a get. Has to give her a get for the mimer and chalitza for the zik. So now Tana Rabbanan, we learned in the Braisa, minayin she'im ireis esu almana, and then v'nismana liyos kohen gadol. How do we know that he can go through with the wedding? Sheyichnois Talmud Leimer yikach isha. We learned this before. The word isha is extra, and we learned the extra word to include this case. I asks the Gemara ihachi shemeres yavim nami. So now we have the answer, because Isha v'lo Yevamos. Oh, it's really, this should have been something prohibited. The only reason why he can do it is because there's an extra word Isha. Isha actually means Isha and not a Yevamos. And now the Gemara continues, that says in the Mishnah, Maisa bi Yehoshua ben Gamla, that the Mishnah used the words that Minohu. Minohu means that one appointed him, someone appointed him. Someone appointed him means that he wasn't appointed by all. Minohu in nisman eloi. He was not appointed by the Sanhedrin. The ideal way for a king to be appointed a king is by having a Navi, or by him being a Melech, Ben Melech, that's a God-fearing person. It should be done with a Navi and with the Sanhedrin. During the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, as we learned together in Masechtas Yuma, that tragically there were more than 300 Kahanim Gedolim. And as the Gemara there pointed out, the whole second Beis HaMikdash stood for 420 years, and there was a Shimon HaTzadik, who was himself a Kohen Gadol for 40 years, and I think there was someone else that was a Kohen Gadol for many, many years. So the Gemara made a cheshbon that it chapped that the other Kahanim Gedolim were a Kohen Gadol for 1 year or less. And why were they only a Kohen Gadol for 1 year or less? Because they were unworthy to have the position. And they got it because they had political connections or other types of corruptions. And because they were unworthy, as the rule is that a Kohen Gadol who enters the Kodesh HaKadoshim, if he's unworthy, he doesn't live out that year. Just to clarify, many people think that they all died in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. True, the Gemara in Yuma says it happened once, which is why they entered with some type of gartel, some type of rope wrapped around them for the very rare occasion of them passing away in the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur. But in most cases, they passed away, but that year sometime. So just to know that this Yeshua ben Gamlo was appointed by an individual, but not by the Sanhedrin. Amar Rabbi Yosef, ketir kochazino hacha. I see a conspiracy. I see corruption here. In other words, Amar Rabasi says that tarkaba, we teach that it means 3 kav, because it's terei. Tarkava is terei and the kav. 3 kav of the dinari of golden coins. Ailola Marta bas Baisus liyane malka. Marta bas Baisus paid the king tremendous amount of gold. Until Yanei HaMelech appointed her husband Yeshua ben Gamla to be the Kohen Gadol, and it happened to be, this was a case where she was only engaged to him. Imagine, she invested money with the chassan, and he was taka appointed. And by the way, even though it was not the ideal way, but he had the din of a Kohen Gadol.
So just to clarify,
yes,
the distinction we're making between whether the king appoints him or whether the Sanhedrin appoints him, are we saying that if he was only engaged and then the Sanhedrin appointed him, then he would not be able
no, makes no difference. Makes no difference.
So what's the point of...
It's just to know, it's just apparent to know from the wording of them. In other words, the Mishnah is giving you halacha that if he's already engaged to an almana, he can marry her. Period. Regardless. Being that the Mishnah used the words that he was appointed from a singular person, we should remember the conspiracy, the ketir, or the corruption that happened. Says the next Mishnah, Kohen Gadol shemeis achiv chaylitz v'lo miyabim. That if a Kohen Gadol had a brother who died, and the brother left a widow, and the brother died childless, so the Kohen Gadol cannot do Yibum, we can only do Chalitza. And the question is, Pshita, if we learned in the previous Mishnah, that if when as a Kohen, he was already a Yavam, and a Shemeres Yavam, he cannot do Yibum, here he's already a Kohen Gadol. And he became a Yavam while he's a Kohen Gadol. So of course, Chaylis Shalom Yabim. So says the Tosfos Kohen Gadol Shemeitz, Achiv, Chaylis Shalom Yabim, in the wide lines, it's the third Tosfos. V'im tema mireisha sheminalei the ktani shemeres yavam l'kain hedid v'nismalei is Kohen Gadol yichnois. So then he gives a great answer. So v'amari dahacha chaylitz asal ashma'inan. What we would have thought, just like we learned in the beginning of the Masechta, that if the Yevama is an erva, not only can you not do Yibum, you don't even need to do Chalitza. Being that a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a Almana, you would think that even Chalitza is not needed. So the Chiddush of the Mishnah here is that he needs to do Chalitza. Very good. So now it says the Gemara Kopasik V'Taning, that the Mishnah categorically made a statement. A Kohen Gadol Shemeis Achiv Loishna Mino Erusin, implying that it doesn't make a difference if this widow is a widow from only an engagement or if she's a widow from marriage. So now the Gemara asks Gavaldik, if the Kohen Gadol has a brother who passed away and the brother was married to his wife Rachel, so she's a widow and she was married, which means she's not a virgin, she's not a psula. The Kohen Gadol doing Yibum with her is a violation both of an asay, because he's supposed to marry a psula, and she's married, so she's a ba'ula, and she's an almana. Him marrying an almana is a lav, is a loisase. And therefore, ve'ein asay of Yibum doicha loisase ve'esa, which is why the Mishnah says, chaylitz v'lo miyabim. But if she's only widowed from an engagement, and therefore, why can't the Kohen do Yibum with her? Not because she's a ba'ula. It's only because of the lav that he's not allowed to marry an almana. She's called an almana. But why don't we say that yavei asay of Yibum and v'yitches loises of almana? That was the whole beginning of Masechta Yevamos. Great question. We had this mentioned before. And the Gemara says, you're right, that if she's an almana only from Erusin, the act of Yibum in itself stays, and it's a mitzvah. And the essay is doicha loisasa. Don't forget, it's a lav she'ein by kares for the almana not to marry a Kohen Gadol, for a Kohen Gadol not to marry an almana. Elama, here's the issue: the mitzvah of Yibum is having the one act of bia with the widow. After that happens, if that were to happen, he would have to right away divorce her, because now there's no more mitzvah saseh, and she's an almana. And the Chachamim were afraid to allow a marriage where the husband, after the first act of Bia, has to divorce her, because they were afraid that if he had one Bia with her, he's going to have another Bia with her. And the second Bia would not be a mitzvah saseh, would be a lav. So l'chatchila they said, do chalitza. And this really explains why chalitza is needed. Why takas chalitza needed? When it comes to an erva, we learn even chalitza is not needed. Here chalitza is needed. You know why chalitza is needed? Because mid'oraisa, he has to do yibum. Because esadai chaloisasa. It's only mechachamim that he can't do yibum. And we have this rule many times. Whenever there's a Torah obligation and the prohibition of marriage of yibum is only midrabanan, chalitza is needed. Next Mishnah. Kohen Hedyot is not allowed to marry an islandess. An islandess means a woman who developed certain signs which show that she can never carry children. The word islandess comes from the word ayol. Ayol means a male ram. One of the signs of this woman is that she has a very manly voice, and we'll learn later about all the other simanim. But a kohen gadol cannot marry an islandess. Ella imkein yesh lo isho banim, only if he already has a wife and children. And as we'll see in the Gemara, that every Jew is obligated to have children, pru uruvu. And if he doesn't yet have children, he cannot marry an islandess. And as the Gemara is going to point out, well, that has nothing to do with the kohen. That's really a din on any Jewish man, that if he does not yet have children, he's not allowed to marry an islandess, and enochanami. And the Gemara will explain why this is put in the context of a kohen. Rabbi Yehuda says something even more, that that even if the kohen already has a wife and children, he's never allowed to marry an islandess. Shehi Zaina Ha'amura B'Torah. As we'll see in Daf Samach Aleph Amud Beis in today's Daf, we're going to learn, like I mentioned, 6 Tanoim explaining 6 different meanings of Zaina. Rabbi Yehuda teaches the word Zaina not in a negative connotation as a woman misbehaving. The word Zaina means a woman who can't have children. And as the place can point out, not a woman who cannot have children because of her age. That not. A woman who by nature cannot have children. A kohen can never marry her. So now it makes sense that it's only on a kohen. The Chachamim say that ein zoina, a zoina only means either a convert, and as we learned in previous daf, in this itself there's a machlokes between the Rashbi and the Chachamim. What about a convert who converted before she was 3 years old? But everyone holds that after 3 years old in one day, when she's ru'uya lebe'ila, she's asa l'kain, or a mishuchreres, a woman who was a slave, right, a shifcha kananis, who was then emancipated, she's just like a giyotis, or, and here's the key words, v'shenivala be'ilaznos, or if she had a relation with a man who she's not allowed to have such a relation. She's not allowed to marry such a man. In other words, according to the Chachamim, a single Jewish woman who had a relation with a man will not make her into a zaina, because she could marry him. It's only if she had a relation with a man that cannot marry her. Now here we have a very important machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos here. That when the Chachamim hold, Paskin like the Chachamim, that she becomes a zaina, if shenivala be'ila znus, is it that she had a relation with a man whom she cannot marry only because of an isur lav, which is shitas Rashi, more chamur, or according to Tosfos, that what makes her a zaina if she had a relation with a man who marrying him is violating an isur that carries the penalty of kares. For example, she had a relation with a mamzer. For example, a Jewish woman marrying a mamzer is asr b'lav. There's no kares there. Will that make her into a zaina? That's a machlokes Rashi Tosfos. Let's move on to the Gemara. So first of all, Amalei Reish Galusa l'Rav Huna. Reish Galusa asked Rav Huna when he learned this Mishnah, my tama, why can't a kohen in the Tanakama who doesn't yet have children marry an islandess? So Rav Huna explained, because of Piriya v'Rivya. So Reish Galusa asked Rav Huna, a Piriya v'Rivya kahanim u'demifkadi, but Yisrael le'mifkadi. That has nothing to do with kahanim. So Amalei said, Rav Huna says, you're right. The reish of the Mishnah has nothing to do with kahanim. But since Mishum de Kabayla Mishnah Seifa, since this Mishnah brings the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says, Afal pi sheyesh lo isha, turning the page, v'yesh lo banim, a kohen cannot marry an islandess, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, shehi zayno hamura b'Torah. The Azoina, only Kahanim are mifkidi, are commanded not to marry, and Yidden are not commanded not to marry. So since Rabbi Yehuda's opinion only goes to a Kohen, Mishum Hachik Tani Kohen in the Reisha. But Enachanami, there's a din, and that's going to open up many dafim to come. We're going to start learning about the mitzvah of Piri V'Rivya, the mitzvah of having children. That there's a mitzvah for men to have, for Jewish men to have children, as will be defined so. Now, Amar Rav Huna, my Tamad Rabbi Yehuda. From where does Rabbi Yehuda take that the Uzoina, which is normally translated as a harlot, doesn't refer to a woman who is with other men? It refers, according to Rabbi Yehuda, a woman who cannot have children. So he based it on a pasuk. It says in Hosea, "Achlu v'lo yizbo." Right? This is like a negative prophecy. That will be a time that people will eat, but they will not be satisfied. His new, they will have relations, v'lo yifroitzu, and they will not proliferate. They will not have children. So we have a pasuk that interprets his new as lo yifroitzu. In other words, what makes a woman a zoina? A woman who cannot have children. Kol bia she'emba pirza. Any relation that cannot cause something breaking forth, that cannot cause a proliferation, eina ella bi'ila znus. And not for right now, but just to be aware of the question that all of the Mefarshim speak about. If that's the case, if any relation that cannot make o faratzta, that cannot cause children, is called hiznu, then why can a Kohen marry an older woman? Which he could. Kohen could marry an older woman. In other words, the idea of v'lo yifroitzu means a woman who inherently cannot have children. Okay, now let's move on. Tanya.
What about all the other cases that we say are a zoina where they could have children?
Oh, that's not the way Rabbi Yehuda defines it. No, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, Mamish doesn't define it that way. He will learn that if a woman had a relation with another man, doesn't matter, she's not a zoina. Nothing to do with zoina. He teaches zoina.
She can marry a Kohen?
Yes, we don't paskin that way. There are 6 Tanoim, yeah, we'll see soon. There's a lot to do with the Isur Zaina. But the way the Gemara opens it up is by quoting another Rabbi Eliezer. Interesting. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Rabbi Eliezer made a statement that Kohen, not a Kohen Gadol, a Kohen cannot marry a Ketana, period. It's fantastic. Now go figure out why. So Amalei Rab Chizda l'Rabba. It's a very cute way, the way Rab Chizda worded it. Rab Chizda tells Rabba, Poik, go out, ayin ba, and look into this. Go figure out the reason behind Rabbi Eliezer. Why? Not for you to know. He tells him because the lo'urta boyela Rav Huna minach, because tonight Rav Huna is going to ask you the meaning of this brayso, and you have to know what to answer him. One of the motivators for people to learn is when they know that someone to whom they don't want to lose face is going to ask them to explain something, so you really learn it well. So in any event, he was challenged to figure out why did Rabbi Eliezer say that a Kohen cannot marry a girl who's under 12. Okay, so Nafak, Rabbi went out, Ayin Boy, he looked into it, and he came with this chap. So he tells Rabbi Chizda, his teacher, here's a chaim. Rabbi Eliezer evidently holds both like Rabbi Meir and like Rabbi Yehuda. And he explains right away what he means. So like Rav Meir, this Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rav Meir. What is Rav Meir? The chayish l'mauta. Rav Meir, all in the whole Shas, is concerned for a minority. Now normally we say that you go after the majority. You go after the majority. The question is, do you take in account the minority? Rabbi Meir, in many places throughout Torah, in many different subjects, gives credibility to a minority. He takes in account the minority. And as we'll see soon, what the minority is. And Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Yehuda that says that an islandess is a zoina. So now we talk it out. A minority of women are an islandess. From when can you notice if a woman is developing simani islandess? When she turns 12 years old, the first thing what happens is that her body does not begin to mature. A halacha non-ketana isn't only a girl that's 12 years old. It's a girl that's 12 years old and has at least 2 hairs in her body, which means she's not an islandess. So if Rabbi Eliezer holds both like Rav Meir, Chashin and Lemauta, and like Rabbi Yehuda, that an islandess is a zoina, that explains why he said what he said. A Kohen cannot marry a Ketana, because maybe she'll be an islandess. If you don't hold like Rabbi Meir, who cares if the minority of women are an islandess? She's from the majority. But if you're Chashin and Lemauta, then you have to know she's not an islandess. How do you know it? Only when she's a Na'ara. When she's 12 and her body begins to develop, then you know she's not an islandess. So that's a good chap. The problem is that it can't be correct. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer does not hold like Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Eliezer does not like Rabbi Yehuda. He's wrong in both accounts. So Rabbi Chizda tells Rabbi, Uche Rabbi Meir misavar lo. Does Rabbi Eliezer indeed hold like Rabbi Meir when it comes to the concept of chashinin or loy chashinin limauta? For Atayim we learn the cotton or ktana loy cholsin v'lo miyabmim. That not if the brother is a cotton, nor if the Yevama is a ktana, they cannot do, not chalitza, not yibum. You have to wait until they become adults. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Amrulai Rabbi Meir. So the sages disagreed with Rabbi Meir and they told him, Yafa Marta Shein Cholzen, we agree with you that a cotton, a yavam, cannot do yibum, cannot do chalitza, because it says in the parsha of chalitza, it says V'im lo yachpoitz ho'ish lokachas es yivimtoi. And ho'ish means an adult. Ish ksiv beparsha. And just like if you're not a ish, you cannot do chalitza. If the girl is a ktana, if she's not an isha, then she can also not get chalitza. Because umakshinon isha leish, because it says in the next pasuk, v'alsa yevimtoi hasha'ara. So this juxtaposition, we juxtapose the yevimtoi, the woman, to the man. Just like ish is an adult, when it comes to chalitza, she cannot be a ktana. Ella, they asked Rab Meir, my tama in the yabim. If they're choosing the option of yibum, and mind you, they're not really affecting a new marriage. They're only giving continuity to the marriage of the brother. Why can't they be together? So Amalei, so Rab Meir responds that katan, the reason why a katan cannot do yibum, shema yimtza saris. Again, Rab Meir is chashin l'mauta. Rab Meir holds that since there is a small amount of men that never develop the power to have children, they're called a sadis. And a sadis cannot do yibum because what's the whole point of yibum? Lahakim, shame, to give a name to the brother by having children, so maybe he's going to be a sadis. And iktana shema timsa islandess. And if that's the case, if he is a sadis or if she is an islandess, and therefore there is no mitzvah of yibum because they cannot extend the brother's name, automatically the isur erva of your brother's wife goes back. The nimsa paigim be'erva. So clearly you see that if you hold like Rabbi Meir, a katan or a ktana cannot perform yibum. If chashin l'mauta. And v'tanya, and we learned that ketana.
What is a ketana for you?
Same thing, because the whole thing is lahakim shame. And if the widow, if the yevama is going to be an islandess, if she'll be an islandess, then there is no chance to have a child with her.
Ketana could marry the original marriage.
Yeah, of course, but not yibum. Because
we don't know if she might be an
and if she'll be an islandess, then the isur eishes ach goes back. So in other words, clearly, if yibum with the katana or not with the katana has to do if you hold chashin l'mauta. And you Rabba came with a chap that Rabbi Eliezer holds. Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Meir. If that would have been the case, he found a brayso. Rabba found a brayso. I'm sorry, Rabbi Chizda found a brayso to Rabba in where it says ketana misyabemes ve'enoi chayletzes divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Clearly, Rabbi Eliezer says yibum could be done, which means Rabbi Eliezer loy chayish l'mauta. That's for what you said regarding Rabbi Meir. You're wrong on that count. And when it comes to Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yehuda says that an islandess is a zoina, he says uche Rabbi Yehuda misaver lo. How can you say that Rabbi Eliezer defines zoina the way Rabbi Yehuda does? It's not true. And now we're going to quote the Baraisa with all of the 6 opinions. And just before we go into it, the first one opinion is Rabbi Eliezer in that Baraisa, and another opinion is Rabbi Yehuda. They don't have the same opinion. But I be learned. Zoina.
We didn't say that Rabbi Eliezer. You say Rabbi Eliezer has to hold like Rabbi Yehuda. An islandess is a zoina.
In order for the din of Kohen cannot marry Ktana for it to make sense, the way Rabbi made it sense, he has to both hold like Rabbi Meir and like Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Chizda tells Rabbi, not loiza v'loiza. It's fantastic. Now, Rabbi didn't know all the prices. They didn't have access to all the prices. But that was a good rebuttal that knocked them off. Now, what's the brisa? Zoina Zoyna Kishma Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. We're going to interpret this the way Rashi interprets because we have a big machlokes rishonim by all of the 6 opinions. But let's begin like this. The way Rashi learns Rabbi Eliezer says a Zoyna only refers to a married woman who was promiscuous. That's the meaning of Zoyna Kishma. Obviously, you can interpret it differently. That's the way Rashi teaches it. In other words, if a woman not married had not one relation, God forbid, was mufkeres liznus, she was available for all men, she's not the zoyna that's asr to the kohen. Zoyna only means if she was married and she had a relation with another man, then her husband dies, she's a widow, a kohen can marry a widow. Torah says no, but she's a zoyna. That's the one definition. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Kiva takes it a step further, that even as an unmarried woman, zoyna zu mufkeres. Zoyna means that even if she's unmarried, if she abandoned herself, if she was very promiscuous, but very promiscuous according to Rabbi Kiva also means that she needed to be a woman who had many relations with many men. According to Rabbi Kiva, if a woman one time had a relation with a man, that's not called zoyna according to Rabbi Kiva. Rab Masya ben Chodesh says,
It was only one man, but it was like multiple times. Like she dated a guy for a long time.
I don't think that's called mufkeres liznus. Rab Masya ben Chodesh Omar, afilu halach bailo lahashkaisa ubo olera baderech asa zoyna. Rab Masya ben Chodesh is the most holds that the least stringent relation makes her into a zoyna. What relation is the least problematic? The least problematic relation is in the case of a soita, when a man suspected his wife, warned his wife in front of 2 witnesses not to be alone with a certain individual. She was alone with that man. There are witnesses to that. So in such a case, the husband takes the wife to the Beis HaMikdash and she undergoes the whole process of a soita. Now until she drinks the water, the husband and wife are not allowed to be together. This is considered a weak violation. Why is it called a weak violation? Because you're speaking about a husband and his wife. So the Masya ben Chodesh says that even if they only violated that weak violation, she's already considered a zayin.
Does that mean that for sure he holds that a woman that was promiscuous?
Yes. Yes.
For sure.
Yes. Rabbi Yehuda, here's the famous Rabbi Yehuda says a zoyna has nothing to do with being promiscuous. B'chlal not. As we brought the pasuk from Hosea, a zoyna refers to a woman that is physically unable to have children, not because of her age, but she's a barren woman. Zu islandess. The 5th opinion is the Chachamim that say ein zoyna elo, either a giyotis or a mishuchreres, in other words she's a convert, or v'shanivelo be'ila znus. The difference between the Chachamim and Rabbi Masya ben Chodesh is that according to the Chachamim, in the case of a soita, if the husband had a relation with his wife, she will not be considered a zoyna. When will she be considered a zoyna? If she had a relation with a man whom she cannot marry. Right, a soita who has a relation with her husband, she's married to him. That's the only difference. And again, machlokes Rashi and Tosfos, if she has a relation with a man that she cannot marry, is it with a man who she cannot marry because there's a lav, even if there's no kadis? Or according to Tosfos, only if she had a relation with a man who she cannot marry with the penalty of kadis. And the 6th opinion is Rabbi Elazar. Right, it can't be Rabbi Eliezer. The first Tana was Rabbi. This is Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua says that any time you have a panui haba al panuya shaloi l'shem issues. All right, this is more chomer than Rabbi Kiva Dani. Here, what Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua is saying, that if a woman had one relation out of wedlock, one time, she was not mufkeres lakoil, that already turns her into a zoyna. Okay, these are all of the 6 opinions. Bottom line is that Rabbi Eliezer, the Tanakama, and Rabbi Yehuda have 2 different opinions. So now the question is back. How do you explain the Braisa that says, that Rabbi Eliezer says, that a Kohen cannot marry a Ketana? Elo Omar Rav Ada bar Ahava, here Rabbi Eliezer is only speaking about a Kohen Gadol. That a Kohen Gadol cannot marry a Ketana. Why not? As we explained many times, marriage has to be done with the consent, both of the man and the woman. A minor, halachically, doesn't have consent. She's too young to have consent. So if a Kohen Gadol were to marry a Ketana, their relation in the beginning is not called a marriage, because she cannot get married. When will she become married? The moment she turns into an adult, halachically, when she turns 12 years old in one day, and she begins to develop. But at that time, she's already a ba'ula. She's already a woman who's a non-virgin. Even though she's a non-virgin because the Kohen Gadol had relations with her, but we learned that in the Daf Nun Testament Beis in the Braisa, that even anusas atzmai, umafutas atzmai, is considered a ba'ula. Let's read it inside. Leimas kanila, when will the marriage halachically go into effect? Only when she becomes an adult. And when she becomes an adult, ba'ulahi. That's what Rav Ada said. Rava very strongly protested against that. And Omar Rava tells Rav Ada bar Ahava, Machali Leiv, you are a destroyer of minds. Your logic is a destroy. It's totally illogical. How can a minor get married? Halachically. A minor doesn't get married on her own. In the Torah, a minor can only get married if her father married her. And when a father marries her daughter, even if the daughter is a minor, the father has consent, and his consent makes the marriage a biblical marriage. Either if she was married by her father, that is marriage. The Kohen Gadol married a psula. Like any other woman who he marries, that after he marries her, she's no longer a psula. But he married a psula. And the kacha nafsha, Rabbi Eliezer, it's even more than that. If, being that this is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, what did Rabbi Eliezer say? That any woman who had a relation out of wedlock becomes what? Becomes a zoina. So if he married her without the consent of her father, really there is no marriage. The problem there is not because she's a ba'ula. What is the problem? That she's a zoina. So therefore, that's not the meaning of Rabbi Eliezer. Ela Amar Rava explains the meaning of this brayso, which is the words of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, "Kohen lo yisa es aktana." Why? Chayshinon shema tispate olav. She might be seduced while she's married to him, and then she'll be prohibited to be with him. And this is a very important rule. I already mentioned it right now. Shulchan Aruch says that a man should not marry a woman who's a lot older or a lot younger than him. As a good advice. What's the good advice? That when people have a very large age difference, their physical needs are very different, and there's more chance for people being promiscuous in their marriage. In other words, let's say if a woman marries a very old man, he won't have an interest to be with her. So her needs won't be fulfilled. So she'll look for another man, or vice versa. And here we're using a similar logic, that if the Kohen is marrying a minor, a woman who's very young is easy to get seduced. And what would happen if his wife would have a relation with another man? He will be prohibited to be with her. So don't marry a minor. So the Gemara says, what kind of logic is that? Why is that only with the Kohen? Ihachi Yisrael Nami. If Rabbi Eliezer should have said, no one should marry a minor girl because she's not strong mentally. She's still very young, and someone else can seduce her. So the Gemara says like this, that if Yisrael marries a minor, and even if she's seduced by another man, halachically, any relation with a girl under 12, even if she consented, is called a rape. It's called an unconsensual relationship, because she doesn't really consent. And lahavdil, the Goyim applied this din today in the Goyish law. That if a man has a relation with a girl today under a minor under 18, it's called a rape. It's illegal. Statutory rape. She didn't say no. She was so young, she didn't know how to say no. So this is a Jewish law. We just apply it to a different age bracket. And by a Yisrael, if a Yisrael's wife, God forbid, gets raped, the husband can be with her. But a Kohen cannot continue to be a husband to a wife, even if she was raped. And v'oines be Yisrael mishra. So Rabbi Eliezer gives good advice. Don't marry a Kohen, don't marry a Ktana. She might have a relation with another man. Rav Papa gives another interpretation. Rav Papa says that the Kohen Gadol, that Rabbi Eliezer was referring to a Kohen Gadol, and V'hai Tanahu, and Rabbi Eliezer is like the following Braisa. The time to be learned, Psula. A Kohen Gadol has to marry a virgin, Yochel Ktana. You might think that this includes a minor. Talmud Leimer Isha. It says Psula Ma'amav Yikach Isha. Isha, an adult, a woman. You would think that he can marry a Brigeres. Talmud Leimer Psula. Right, we had this whole thing in the Mishnah Daf Nun Tes. We had the Tanoim that held that once a girl is 12 and a half, her Psulim are getting weakened, right? He cannot marry her. So in other words, who can a Kohen Gadol marry? A girl who's a virgin, who's between 12 and 12 and a half years old. And that's the meaning of this braisa. In other words, not only do we hold like the opinion in Daf Nun Tes that said that the opinion of Ravi Meir, the Tanakama, that a Kohen Gadol should not marry a Boigeres, but in the Mishnah we said he can marry a Nara and maybe even a Ktana. So Rabbi Eliezer says a Ktana also not. A Kohen Gadol can only marry a Nara. Period. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Omar Hai Tanahu. It goes. This Tana of Rabbi Eliezer is the following Tana. The Tanya can be learned Psula in Psula Ela Nara. When the Torah says that a Kohen Gadol should marry a Psula, a virgin, a Psula, the meaning of Psula is a girl between 12 and 12 and a half. And it says when it comes to Rivka Imenu, Vahanara Toivas Mare Mo'oid, that Rivka was very good looking, Psula. And she was 12 years old.
So he's saying also that it's referring to Kohen Gadol.
Yes. Yes. So we have the third Tosfos. We're not going to read the whole Tosfos inside. But for people who learn Chumash and Rashi, right? In this cycle right now, we just left the parsha of the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka a few weeks ago. And what does Rashi say? How old was Rivka? She was 3 years old. What does this Tana say? That she was 12. And Tosfos actually brings another opinion. I mean, he's asking on this Braisa. He's saying that here it says that she was 12, and Seder Olam says she was 3. Then Tosfos brings from Harav Shmuel Chassid Mishapira. Look at this name. And he made a whole proof that Rivka was 14 when she got married. And Tosfos brings the whole proof. And the bottom line is, if you want to just look at the last line of this Tosfos, of the third Tosfos, that there's a big debate all the way back to the Tanoim regarding the age of Rivka. So when we say Rivka was 3, she was 3, she was 12, she was 14. Listen, 12 is hard, 14 is hard, but it makes it a lot easier to understand that age, right, than 3. Hostile. Anyway, he holds that, and therefore, bottom line is whenever the Torah says the word psula, psula means a girl of 12, not because she'll invite. Rabbi Lazar Omer Panoi Halbal Pnuya Shaloi L'Shem Ishus Asa'a Zoina. We are quoting now the final opinion in the Braisa. Amar of Amram Ein Halacha Ki Rabbi Elazar. We do not paskin like Rabbi Elazar, and the reason why he's saying it is, as we just learned before, because we had 2 dafim ago a attempted explanation that Rabbi and Daf Samach that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's opinion that the child is a cholol is based on Rabbi Elazar, and we want to refute it, and we refuted it because since Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki, halach is like him, halach is not like this Rabbi Elazar. So therefore, as we explained, the reasons behind Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is not because it's based on the Tana of Rabbi Elazar ben Shammua. Period. Now that we spoke about the mitzvah of having children, now we're going to go into this whole sugya of the mitzvah of Pru Urvu, the mitzvah rabbah. Says the Mishnah, Lo yevatel adam mipiriya v'rivya. A man should not stop having children, elam kein yesh lebanim, unless he has children. In other words, we're going to see in this Mishnah that there's a certain number of children, that once you had that number, you fulfilled your obligation, and until you fulfilled your obligation, you should continuously try to have children. How many children do you have to fulfill the mitzvah? Argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says you have to have at least Shnei Zecharim, 2 sons. Beis Hillel Oimrim, and Beis Hillel says Zachar u'nekeva. You have to have a son and a daughter, a male and a female. Shenemar, because it says Zachar u'nekeva bera'am, that Hashem created Adam as a male and a female, and we have to, so to say, follow in God's ways. God made a man and a woman. We have an obligation to make a Zachar and a nekeva. So first of all, the Gemara begins with the following. Our Mishnah was not speaking about marriage. Our Mishnah was speaking about the obligation on a man to have children. So we're going to try to infer a law from what the Mishnah did not say, a Jewish logic. Ha yesh lo banim. One way of inferring something from the Mishnah is saying that if you have already children, then true mipiriya v'rivya batal. You are not obligated to try to have more children, but mi'isha lo batal. But you have to be a married man. And this will be a proof to that which Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, that afal pi sheyesh lo adam kama banim, that even if a man has many children, he fulfilled his mitzvah l'beishamai u'lebesilol, plus still asur la'amoid b'lo isha. A man is not allowed to live out of marriage. A man has to be married. Shneimar, as it says, lo toiv hayois ha'adam levadei, that it's not good for man to be alone. So this way of learning the Mishnah will be a backup to Shmuel. Other people inferred from the Mishnah the opposite, that if the person already had children, that not only is he not obligated to have more children, but he doesn't even have to be married. As Tosfos explains, because the Mishnah could have said that a person should not marry a woman who cannot have children unless he already has children. And the fact that the Mishnah B'chlal did not speak about marriage, so there's a way of inferring it that the Mishnah is putting them together. That if you don't have children, you have to get married and have children. If you already have children, you don't have to get married and you don't have to have children. And therefore that's going to be a tiyuf to Rav Nachman Shmuel. So he says, loy, ein loy banim. If a person doesn't have children, noise isha bas banim, then when you get married, you have to marry a woman who could bring you children. But the yesh loy banim, if you already have children, you have to get married. But you don't have to marry a woman that could have children. Noise isha dalav bas banim. And Lamay Nafkamina will be Limkar Sefer Torah B'Shvil Banim. We learned together that one of the few reasons why a person can sell a Sefer Torah, if I'm not mistaken, it's for Pidyon Shavuyim and to get married. Now what happens if there's a woman who's older or for whatever reason cannot bear children, she's agreeing to marry you. And you don't have to have money to marry her. But there's another woman who could bear children who would be interested to marry you if you would have a few dollars. So can you sell a person can sell a Sefer Torah to get married. Selling a Sefer Torah to get married doesn't only mean selling a Sefer Torah to have money to make the party. Selling a Sefer Torah to get married means that women can tell a man, I would like to marry you if you would be wealthy. I would like to marry you if you would have a few dollars to your name. If you're such a pauper, if you don't have what to eat, to you I don't want to get married. In such a case, a man can sell a Sefer Torah to have a certain amount of capital for him to be more attractive for the woman to want to marry him. So the question is, that's the whole point of Shmuel, that if a man does not have children, then he's allowed to sell a Sefer Torah in order to be able to marry the woman who's a bas banim woman. But if he already has children, then Shmuel is right. A man cannot be living out of marriage. Every man has to be married. But he cannot sell a Sefer Torah, marry an older woman. Marry a woman who's willing to marry you poor, even though she's a woman who's not a bas banim woman. I just want people to know that in halacha, we say more than that. In halacha, it's brought down in the beginning of Ibn Ezer that there's a pasuk in Nach that says Ula erev al tanach yodecha, that in the evening don't put your hand down. And that verse means that in your evening, meaning even when you're older, meaning even though you already did the mitzvah, al tanach yodecha, don't put your hand down, keep on having children. So there is a mitzvah to have children even after you had the boy and the girl, but there's no obligation of pru uruvu. Let's go on. Beishamai says, what's the mitzvah to have two sons? Mai tamayu de Beishamai. I mean, after all, Beis Hillel brought a pasuk, right? Zachru nekeva b'ra'am. So that the reason of Beishamai is because we learned from what Moshe Rabbeinu did. What did we see by Moshe Rabbeinu? The Chsiv, it says, B'nei Moshe. Who were the children of Moshe? Gershom and Eliezer. Two sons. If it was good for Moshe, it's good for us. Beis Hillel says, Yalfinin mibriyasei shaloilam. We learn it from Hashem creating the world. When Hashem created the world, who did He create? Adam and Chava. So Beishamai leilfim mibriyasei shaloilam. Why doesn't Beishamai learn from the creation? So Beishamai has a great answer. Ein danan efsher mishi'i efsher. We already had this concept before. When God created the world, did God have an option of creating two men? No. If God would have created two men, there would have been no further generations. So when God made the world, in the beginning, Hashem needed to create a male and a female. But now that there's a world filled with male and females, if a man will only have sons, they will be able to procreate by marrying a woman out there. So therefore, it's better to compare it to Moshe. Moshe had two sons, at least that are recorded. Moshe, we don't have recorded that Moshe had a daughter. Moshe didn't do the mitzvah. Well, the counter is Moshe did his best, and that's all he had. Or the real answer is,
the whole point is that Moshe stopped having relations.
that's what the Gemara is going to say in a moment. Ubei Silo Nami, why doesn't Beisilo learn from Moshe? So Beisilo says you can't learn from Moshe. Amri Loch, Beisilo tells you, Moshe midatehu de'aved. Moshe acted on his own understanding. In other words, as we learned this together in Masechta Shabbos. The Tanya, as we learned, Shloisha Dvarim Asa Moshe Midatei. There were three things that Moshe Rabbeinu did without Hashem telling him, but V'hiskim Midatei L'das Makim. It happened to be that Hashem agreed with that which he did. Or to word it better, that his understanding was Mechuvan, was according to the ultimate Das, the Kavanah Elyono. And what are the three things that Moshe Rabbeinu did, even though he was not explicitly told to do? But this is actually what Hashem wanted. One is Pirish Min Ha'isha. He separated himself from his wife. And that's going to be important for our sugya. Now, it's Moshe Rabbeinu, before he decided to be Pirish Min Ha'isha, then had Gershom and Eliezer. And really, Beis Hillel holds the mitzvah is to have a son and a daughter. At least, to have a boy and a girl. And Moshe Rabbeinu normally would have had a boy and a girl. But for other reasons, Moshe Rabbeinu separated himself from his wife, and that was an extraordinary, that was an exception, but we cannot learn from the exception. Well, he never gave her a get, he was not with her. And the next thing was V'shiber HaLuchais. The second thing that he did, Midatoi, was he broke the Luchais. And the third thing was, V'hoisiv Yoim Echad, that when it came to Hashem's giving of the Torah, that Hashem said he's giving the Torah at a certain point, and Moshe Rabbeinu added the additional day, and as we'll continue, God willing, tomorrow, this will be a good review of the Gemara we learned together, Masechta Shabbos. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu choose to do each one of these three, and from where do we see that Hashem was maskim with that which Moshe Rabbeinu did? But coming back over here, that's why Beis Hillel says we cannot learn anything from Moshe Rabbeinu. We'll stop over here.